All right, I've got four attendees, early class. So with that being said, I'm gonna pick on you all to see if everything is showing smoothly on my screen. If you're able to hear me okay, give me a thumbs up in the chat. All right, Taylor, I think gave me a thumbs up so she can hear me. So Samira Taylor. Uh, and then also, do you see the first page of the presentation on the screen? If you can give me a thumbs up in the chat for that. Yes, right. So good to go. So we are a little early. It's 12:53. It doesn't start till 1 o'clock. But with that being said, too, we also get some stragglers in uh, a couple of minutes after when these trainings start. And so we'll probably go ahead and get started officially about 1:02 p.m. But I promise you I won't hold you too long, and it will make it interesting. All right, we got a few more attendees that dropped in. I'll give the same announcement that I gave a little bit earlier. It's 3 minutes out. We'll go ahead and get started about 1:02 just to give the stragglers some time to get in so they don't miss anything good. I feel like every point of this presentation would be a good one to hear. And with that being said, you see my lips moving, but if you don't hear sound, it's probably on your end. I already did a sound check. So if you can't hear me, check your settings. And with that being said, too, you should see the first page of the presentation on the screen. All right, it's now 1 o'clock. And I said that I was going to wait at 1:02 a little bit earlier for the stragglers that coming in, but we got a pretty big jump here at 1 o'clock for people ready to talk about outside employment and how to engage in outside employment ethically. So with that being said, we'll twiddle our thumbs here for about 60 more seconds and we'll go ahead and get started. Quick poll before we get started. You can answer in the chat. How many people have outside jobs? You got a part-time job or you volunteer somewhere on a regular basis outside of your DC job? Anybody want to volunteer that information? Teach at Catholic U, volunteer. Yeah, I was an adjunct professor for a little while. I think that was before I was at DC government, though. Teaching from, I think it was about 6 to 8 in the evenings. No, but strongly considering it. Yeah, we're all strongly considering it. Every time I put gas in my truck, I strongly consider a second job or even a third. All right, so it's 101. Um, so just to introduce myself, my name is Maurice Echols. I'm an attorney advisor for the Board of Ethics and Government Accountability, specifically the Office of not open, Office of Government Ethics. We have two offices that work in conjunction with each other, sort of sister offices. There's the Office of Open Government which talks about government transparency, FOIA Act, Opens Meeting Act, making sure that the government discloses the information that they need to disclose to the public. And then there's my office, the Office of Government Ethics, which enforces the code of conduct. We do uh, uh, investigations, basically investigations or complaints regarding violations of the code of conduct. We also give advice, which we give safe harbor advice. So whenever you are thinking about getting an outside job and you're not sure if it conflicts with your employment, or you just want to be sure that it does work with your current employment, reach out and we'll give you advice on things like that. The good thing about getting advice from BEGA is that you get safe harbor protection. So let's say whatever outside activity or job or situation that you called in about, if it turns out that we gave you wrong advice, that you have to stop doing that activity, you won't get fined for it. It'll basically just mediate it. You tried your best, you reached out and you got advice on the situation. It turns out later that you could not do that and you have safe harbor protection. That means that you wouldn't get fined. And then that's also a mechanism for us to, ease any other backlash from another enforcement agency that might be concerned, with the matter. But with that being said, if you don't reach out for advice, like getting written advice from us, an email, it doesn't have to be formal advice where we, take a few weeks to draft a formal opinion that's posted to the website. But informal advice, you reach out, we'll send you an email letting you know how to navigate that situation. And then you will be safe from, fines from BEGA regarding, that situation. And so with that being said, we can go ahead and get started with the rules that concern outside employment or outside activity. So yes, with that being said, whether or not it's employment or volunteering, it would still be considered an outside activity. And then some people not only, maybe volunteer their energy, for a 501c3 or some nonprofit organization, but they also volunteer in leadership roles. So they may be the secretary or treasurer or chairperson of some 501c3, and they don't get paid to do so. It's something that they do in their off hours, where they, help run an organization that does good in their community. And with that being said, they may volunteer in that role. But for the purposes of a lot of these rules, it does not matter if you're paid or you volunteer. It's still considered an outside activity. And there's prohibitions on outside activity when it works alongside of our DC government work. All right, I see a semi question, and that's another thing that I wanted to talk about here too. Is I'm going to give an overview of the rules and some scenarios here and there, and this is a moment too to ask questions, and we can get some clarity. And then also, if the question is a little juicy, maybe take some fault. Feel free to email me, and we can talk about it there. And of course, that email will be safe harbor protected. All right. Somebody asks, what is totally different than what you do paid? Um, so it's a snippet of a question. But yeah, so with that being said, as far as the rules are concerned, when it's an outside activity, you're representing an organization or you're doing something for an outside organization, um, the rules don't much differ from when you're paid or not paid. It's still, if it's a conflict in a volunteer position or a conflict in a paid position, it would be a conflict in a volunteer, much of that same those same actions as well. One moment. So outside activity in the district personnel manual, it's in section 1807. Um, and then there's generally 10 rules or 10 guidelines that if you pretty much stay within those 10 guidelines, you'll avoid violations of the outside activities rule. And this stuff is important. A lot of let's see if I get my cursor back in the same place. A lot of our rules um, are to keep you back from the line of breaking some federal or criminal codes, right? And so we'll fine you in this office for violating many of these rules, which we take seriously when it comes to outside employment and working in your government job. But with that being said, if it's an issue here, sometimes it's an issue in another arena as well, where you could face criminal action. So this is important so we can keep you away from that line of violating those federal restrictions as well that come with criminal sanctions. So Rule 1807.1A, employees cannot engage in outside work that may hinder job performance or the district government's efficiency. And so that's paraphrased there, but that's pretty much what that rule says. You can't have jobs that hinder your job performance. And some of us, believe that, we're really good multitaskers, right? You can have a whole nother job and work them at the exact same time as your district employment and be a shining star in both avenues. And that may be the case. No one may notice, a difference in your job performance. You may be one of those type of people who can well exceed, in many different tasks. But with that being said, if there's just a general thumb or rule there that once you're giving your energy to something else, you can't give 100% of your energy to the district government. And so with that being said, during that shift, whatever it may be, if it's 7:30 to 4 or 8:30 to 5, you are expected to do only your authorized activities, during that time. Your different district government time is also considered government property as well. And so, example of prohibited activities. Sometimes your job may be in off hours, right? But and otherwise, you can work it outside of your government activity. But the position that you're in maybe interfaces with that organization often. And so if you're a chairperson of this organization that does, work with your agency and you're over grants in that agency, and this is the main, grantee of that agency, and so you have to frequently recuse yourself from any time that grantee is involved in a decision, then so many recusals that take up maybe a good chunk of your work, 30, 40, 50% of your work, where you have to put it on somebody else's plate. That will be a conflict of employment. You would have to let one of the jobs go, and I suggest letting the volunteer role go if you have yourself and a family to feed. Then also activities during official work hours. If it's calling on you to work during your official work hours, it's going to be a conflict. You cannot work that job. Now, some people, these virtual jobs, we didn't have this issue so much before we had all of this virtual technology. At first, you couldn't be two places at once. Now you can, because you can show up two places virtually, or one place physically, or another place virtually. With that being said, your outside activity cannot have conflicting work hours. And there are some situations where, let's say you're in your role in DC government, right? And it's from 8:30, 8:30 to 5. But you have a contractor, position with some other, organization. But you have more freedom to, work those hours, when you so please. You may not be managed in that position, but your contract with that organization states that you are to be available between 9 and 3 p.m. And so with that being said, that would be a conflict. You would not be able to take that outside work, even if you do all of your work outside of your DC government hours. You promised that company that you will work from 9 to 3. That agreement in and of itself, um, applying for that position and taking the position with the conflicting hours in and of itself is a violation of the rules. And then, of course, if you work those hours, actually is a violation of the rules. Now, some people may argue, well, I took that job and it had those hours, but I never worked those hours. But then you steady submitted timesheets, with those hours. So now it's an issue of credibility. We do have, I see Esquire in a couple of people's names. So we do have some attorneys that are on the call. But for those who are not, if you ever heard the word credible before, how do I know if you work these, hours during, your district government time or not? You were dishonest when you took the contract. You were dishonest when you submitted the hours for the job. How do I know that you didn't actually work those hours during your DC government time? So we can't find you credible, in those situations. So do not take another job that has conflicting hours with your DC government employee. All right. And so actions and roles conflicting with district interests. So basically, if you take on jobs that have just conflicting interests, you're giving information to them that will conflict with your district government work. Causing them to have a leg up with their negotiations with DC or their work with DC, the outside organization. And so that may be an issue. One person said they're unable to hear me. Does anybody else? Can everybody else hear me okay? All right. So I got a lot of yeses. So I'll try to pick up my volume a little bit. And what was another question I saw here? What if you suspect that your employee has another job and does it during the hours they should be working in my unit? What am I allowed to do as a manager? You should file a ethics complaint. You can let us investigate. Because with that being said, it does show up in our personnel manual, but the ethics issues are not necessarily a personnel matter. Because, like I said, it might not be affecting their performance. They're still showing up to work on time. They're meeting all your meetings, but you just think that they're working another job. Let us investigate. So that's the complaint that you'll file, and we can look into it and figure it out. And in case you didn't hear the question, that was, what if somebody is in my office is working another job? And it could be serious. It could be, we've had, you may have heard, a number of people have hit the news over the past year or so about outside employment that destroys the public trust. So with that being said, we're here. We're being paid by tax dollars that people are forced to pay. Right? And so when you have to pay it, when you're forced to pay it, people like to know that you're being efficient with their money. So if they have a way to keep the cost down because you're giving your energy somewhere else, you're rising the cost, then it's a big issue. And then the next rule, I wanted to go back here because these pictures are interesting. So this is basically a prohibition that against work that interferes with the district government work. And then of course, if you can imagine that the man is your district government employment or the woman, and then the other person is the outside employment. These two are at odds. They're definitely in conflict. So you don't want your outside work to be at conflict with your district government work. You want them to work not together, but separately, very, very separately, right? This is another issue that that arises often because with this being said, you're not necessarily on the clock, right, for your outside activity sometimes, but you do have outside activity, and it may be along the same lines as your district government work. And so, with that being said, a lot of people get in trouble when they're wearing too many hats, and they mean well. It's just that you really have to know, when to turn it on and when to turn it off, when you're in your district capacity and when you're in your personal capacity. When you mix the two, it looks like you're on duty for, for both jobs or that you have. And sometimes your outside activity is not necessarily a job. Sometimes it's a business that you run or an activity that you just do that may generate funds for you. Sometimes you don't even call it a job. It's like a hobby, like you write books or something like that, right? But with that being said, when it happens, during your DC government time, or you're meeting those people in your DC government capacity, or vice versa, you're in a DC government function and you start talking about your outside activity, wearing too many hats can become an issue, and you can violate this rule. And so this one basically says use of government resources. Employees must not use DC government time or resources for non-official activities. So you have to be mindful of when you're in your DC government capacity, you should be talking about DC government stuff, not your outside stuff. Somebody asks, if you take an outside activity call during lunch break, does that still violate the rules? So that's a good question, because this comes up. You may have an hour lunch break or a 30-minute lunch break, and you're not paid for that time. If you notice in your pay, your check is your time is 8.5 hours, but with that being said, you're only paid for 8. And with that being said, you're off duty for that 30 minutes. So technically, if you take a call during that 30 minutes, you would be off duty. Now, the second leg of that rule is that you can't do outside activity inside of a government office. So if you're inside of a government office, or using your government computer or using your government phone, that's still going to run a violation. So technically, you have to take that call outside and on your personal devices. And then let's see, we got another question. I used to work in IRS General Counsel Ethics, General Government Law. Federal government employees had to submit a form each year disclosing outside activities, and then management vetted whether or not an employee could undertake the outside activities. There's such practice in DC. So with that being said, we do have some employees that are financial disclosure. They have to file a financial disclosure statement each year. So on that statement, and this is a BEGA law or BEGA rule as well, on that statement, they have to disclose their outside, employment. And then that is a way that we have a record to, routinely check whether or not that outside activity may conflict with their DC government employment. They also have to check whether or not the spouse works for an organization that conflicts with their employment. And with that being said, then we know to screen this person off for decisions regarding either their outside employment or their spouse's outside employment. Now, some agencies do have policies where their employees must disclose, what their outside activity is and get approval for that outside activity. And that does not conflict with the ethics rules. That is something that those agencies can do. And now I will be honest that sometimes the agency may not approve an employment outside activity that we would analyze and look at and say, well, that's okay to do. So with that being said, in those situations, it wouldn't be an ethics violation to have that outside employment, but it still may be a personnel, issue. And so we like to distinguish ourselves from personnel. This is, ethics. We stay in our lane regarding, ethics. We don't make personnel decisions outside of nepotism violation. All right. So with that being said, use of government resource, employees must not use government time. Just happened. I had something pop up on my screen. Must not use government time or resources for non-official activity. And then the examples of prohibited use: holding another job during official work hours. I just talked about that. Using government computers, emails for outside work. So oftentimes too, you may be active in your outside job and people are looking you up and they can only find your email, your DC government email online. And so then they reach out to you regarding some outside activity on your DC government email. And then you go back and forth with them on your DC government email. That it would be a violation as well. And then also, even, like people that have signatures in their DC government emails, and may have links to, information that was helpful to people who are looking to their agency for different types of help. If you link, your own 501c3 that you direct, in your email, and then people are contacting you and clicking on that, that would be a misuse of government property. And that would also be public office for private gain. So, some of these rules cause a violation of other rules as well. Another question that's came in: do you get copies of all the BEGA financial disclosures for both public and private? So, of course, public is posted publicly on our website. Those were the public disclosures go. Now, the non-public disclosures, those stay housed with the agency. Now, we have had some updates to some systems where we now do those, online, so that has become a database, but it's still non-public. I do think we do have that now. I'm not the FDS attorney, and so I hear some of the updates and upgrades and things of that nature, but it's not fresh, on my memory. So here's another prohibition. Somebody asks, why does the spouse outside employment matter if the spouse is not a government employee? Because we don't want the person who does work for DC government employee to mistakenly, or it might not even be a mistake. We don't want the DC government employee to approve, a contract or an application or something for their spouses outside for their spouse's work. So let's say I am an employee for the Department of Buildings. My spouse is an architect for a big design firm that designs buildings in DC. And so, we need to know that. So whenever that firm applies or is seeking, work with the Department of Buildings, that I can stay off of those decisions, because that will be a conflict of interest. There's a law. So most of these rules are in the personnel manual and then also the municipal regs, but there's also a law in the DC code regarding conflict of interest. And you don't want to make a decision that affects the financial standings of yourself in your government work, or a closely affiliated person, which would be your spouse or your mother or your father, or people that live with you, general business partners, people like that. All right. So prohibition against ordering or asking subordinates to perform tasks not having to do with district work. This is another way we violate the outside activities. You're actually causing your subordinates to either support your outside activity or to do things that have nothing to do with their job. And that would be a violation. So employees cannot request subordinates to perform personal tasks during work hours. And we have the relevant picture there. I'm assuming the lady sitting down in her robe is the director. and the maid is one of her staffers that she's have been doing things that are outside of her DC government work. But the examples of prohibited actions are assigning subordinates non-district related tasks. Hey, I need you to work on this flyer for my 501c3. That I know you do flyers. Sit there at your desk and do it. That would be a violation. And then also using subordinates as personal assistants, so we can see as the picture, taking your outside phone calls and things of that nature. That would be prohibited. All right, and what we were just discussing in the question, we jumped ahead. We got conflict of interest. There's a prohibition against maintaining a financial interest or serving as an officer if you might have to take action regarding the outside activity. And so the conflict of interest prohibition that is in the personnel manual, employees cannot hold financial interest or serve as officers in outside entities likely to be involved in government actions they influence. That was the situation I was talking about earlier, when you're taking a job or when you have a job, and you could be volunteering, but sometimes it's still conflicts. You're a chairperson, you're in a higher up role, and that agency or that organization is always before you in your position, for a decision-making matter. That would be, generally a conflict of interest. So prohibit activities: serving on the board of organization regulated by your agency, owning securities in a regulated organization, Now, with the owning securities part, if it's part of your retirement plan and you don't necessarily govern or pick those securities or anything like that, there's an exception to that, to that rule. Like, that there's somebody else investing on your behalf. You may not even be aware that you own securities in this company. But with that being said, if you do actively invest, your funds and have knowledge of it, you're to disclose, those securities on your FDS statement if you're a financial disclosure employee. Um, a statement filing employee, and then also avoid that in your work if for whatever reason the company that you're invested in comes before you in decision making matter. You have to file a written recusal. You give it to your supervisor or your agency head, and then also copy us and let us know that you are staying out of this decision making matter regarding this entity because you work there, you have investments there, or because are otherwise affiliated, or your spouse works there or owns securities or something like that. And so there's little jokes that pop in here too, just to keep you fresh. Why did the employee refuse to join the board? And I meant to take these out. Some of them are real corny. Because they didn't want their interest to conflict with their interest in keeping their job. All right, next slide. All right, question. What if your boss asks you to work on an executive non-DC personal equipment? I would need more insight on that question to answer it properly. So I'm going to drop my email again for everyone to have it. You can reach out and ask advice or follow-up questions, and I will answer. All right, next rule. Prohibition against outside employment that capitalizes on official title. So yeah, sometimes this happens as well. And we can see the picture there in the background is a dirty hand, because sometimes this is a dirty deal. Like, and sometimes people don't mean well, but on paper it can sound, kind of dirty. A lot of times people are meaning to help, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes they were, you know, uh, capitalizing on their official title. And so the rule here is misuse of official position. Employees cannot engage in outside activity that capitalizes on their official title or position. Because sometimes we might work for an outside agency that does similar work to the agency that we works for, and it allows us to capitalize, on our official title, because people are looking to the DC government for help or application or a benefit in a certain matter, and you may have affiliation with the organization who can also help, right? And so when you're sitting in your DC government capacity and people reach out to you while you're on duty with the DC government, wear your DC government shirt, and then you start talking about your outside activity, like, hey, go here for help so that organization could get funding or whatever they can get from that individual, like maybe their grant service or things of that nature, that would be a prohibition, and that's capitalizing on your official title. Also, other ways you can do that as well is favors, using your title to gain favors in the outside business, claiming to provide insider information because you have an inner working, or maybe you have access to databases or people who need a certain type of help, and then you in turn access that database to further your private interest. That's going to be a violation of this rule. And then, of course, using your district email for personal business use. Um, and that happens. Let's go back and discuss that. Like I said, like people can be trying to reach you in your private capacity, but then they reach out on your DC government email, and then of course you start doing business from your DC government email. Or sometimes people just don't even recognize that the DC government email is supposed to be used for DC government work only, and they're using it for both personal things and outside business. Both of them could arise to violations, but especially if it's regarding an outside business. Your DC government email should only be used for official government matter. All right. And so our next little picture And this is also a violation. A lot of these rules, you can violate one rule and multiple rules could be violated. So this one is regarding the prohibition against divulging unauthorized non-public government info. You could violate this rule by both using uh, uh, the information uh, in your personal business matter, but then also, of course, giving the information to a third party agency where they, of course, can use it to get a leg up or benefit them or be favored, in some type of application process. So employees must not disclose official government information to unauthorized persons or before it is authorized release. Because even giving public information that, let's say you tell somebody about it on the 10th, but it was going to become public on the 15th. By you giving it on the 10th, you violated this rule. It was not yet authorized to be released. And so giving them even a heads up of stuff coming down the pipeline, that's non-public information and would give, private parties a chance to prepare that other people didn't get a chance to get. And so we violate that rule when we hurt the fairness in those operations. With that being said, when it comes to things like that with the contractors or people bidding on, these $1 million contracts within DC, they get angry. If they don't get the contract, they look for reasons on why they didn't get that contract. And so they'll look for any type of relationship or, who owns what business the decision makers had, and they'll, figure it out and file an ethics violation, and we'll investigate. And sometimes there is a violation there. And it didn't come from a DC government employee. It came from a contractor who didn't get the contract, and they were wondering why. So sharing non-public information with outside employers, that's examples. Using government information for personal business gain, like we discussed, and divulging information before it becomes public. And I don't have that thing memorized. I saw that at the same time as you do. So yeah, so these rules, they're here, and I'm not telling you wrong. Let's see here. Do we got any more questions? Is there someone that we can contact if something comes up and I feel pressure but need clarification? Clarification. In other words, does BEGA have contact email for DC government employees? Yeah. So if you have any ethical issue, and Rashi dropped it in the chat for it. You have any ethical issue, or you believe that the subject touches on an ethics concern, go ahead and give us an email, and we'll give some insight about it. Not all issues are things that we can cover. Sometimes it's just, personnel or an issue of morale or a conflict between individuals. And, unless it touches on a rule that we govern, there's not much that we can do about it. Or sometimes it's a rule that another agency that we feel, can cover. And so we'll refer you, to that agency for more insight as well. But anytime you think that you have, something that you believe to be ethical, you're actually obligated to let us know about it. And then we determine, whether or not, the issue is under our jurisdiction, and whether it's an actual violation that we can investigate. All right, so knowledge check. Susan is an employee of the District of Columbia Office of Nightlife Culture. She educates nightlife establishments on existing district policies and regulations through quarterly trainings. Susan's family has owned and operated a bar on Georgetown Avenue for decades, and Susan works at her family bar on her off days as a host and server. Is it permissible for Susan to continue to work in her family business, and what issues could arise? So we'll answer the first question in the chat. Yes or no? Is it permissible for Susan to continue to work in her family business? We got a couple yeses. I got one no. It was a trick question. I wanted to make it seem like she couldn't, but she can. She still has to be within the guidelines of the ethics rule. But so long as she stays within those guidelines, she can. What issues could arise? Because she does work for the Office of Nightlife, and they govern bars, and then she works at a bar. What issues could arise with that if she doesn't stay within the guidelines? She could make decisions that will cause a conflict of interest, right? Somebody answered it as I was saying. Yeah, conflict of interest is the main issue. Uh, back. Let's see here. What other issues could arise? I want to say there was some more that probably she nightlife, Georgetown, whatever conflict of interest. Pretty much everything she would do could be a conflict of interest. Yeah, because it'll make her bias, preferential treatment, and so basically, in order to save herself from that conflict of interest issue, what should she do? What should she do to keep from having a conflict of interest with her bar, with her family's restaurant or bar? Every time someone says I have poor uh, reception, it unnerves me because I pay for the gaming speed internet, and that's what I expect to have at all times. She should recuse herself from any decision related to her family's bar. That's correct. So basically, anytime her family's bar comes across her desk, she has to recuse from it. She should already be screened off. Like, I work this area, somebody else has to work that bar, and we'll be fine. And then also, as she works in the bar, this is another thing that come up. We have a rule against representation. And so let's say her agency or anybody reaches out to that bar and they have a concern, with um, some safety concern, some issue that DC needs to address. She, because she works for DC government, cannot represent her family's bar uh, in front of DC government. Somebody else who doesn't work for DC government has to speak with DC government on that bar's behalf. It can't be her. So she has to recuse on her government side from dealing with the bar, making decisions regarding the bar. And then while working for the bar, she can't fill out any applications for a liquor license on behalf of the bar or renew the liquor license on behalf of the bar. And she can't apply for, whatever things from the nightlife, certainly, because that's her agency. So she has to stay out of all of that. So both sides. So when she's working within the bar, she can't interface with district government. Somebody else has to speak on that bar's behalf. Even if she owns it, if she inherits it, that's fine. She could be the listed owner of the LLC bar and grill or whatever it is, right? But when it comes to filling out an application and submitting it toward the district, somebody else has to do so. Somebody else that she's authorized to, work there and apply to the district for whatever is needed. They can do it. She can't on both sides. All right, next knowledge check. Sarah is a project manager at the District Department of Transportation and is a licensed engineer. She is approached by a construction company, XYZ Builders, to work as a consultant that would create plans of a major project needing DDOT approval. Sarah's shift at DDOT is from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. And at XYZ, she would not have a set shift, but would occasionally need to take meetings midday for team updates. Sarah accepts the contract, believing her work with XYZ will not impact her official duties. Another staffer at DDOT is responsible for reviewing such plans and proposals. During a review of XYZ Builders' proposals, Sarah's dual role is discovered because she signed off as an engineer on one of the plans submitted by XYZ. What rules have we discussed so far are implicated in this scenario? Just go ahead and just blast them out there and I'll discuss them as I see them. Also, while you guys are answering that, I'm going to go ahead and make an announcement while it's still on my head and before you guys jump off at the end. This is the end of Ethics Week, right? And so we do have a happy hour from 5 to 6 that we would like everyone to attend. You can meet us at Lincoln Restaurant in DC. Is what is it, 1110 Vermont Avenue Northwest, DC. 20005. So Lamont Restaurant in DC from 5 to 6. That's where happy hour is. You can meet us, commune with us. We'll be there. And then also exchange information where you can get some ethics advice. And so, in answering to this question, we got a conflict of interest, working or potentially working during the tour of duty. That is correct because, she could take some working meetings. And like I said earlier in the training, that 30 minutes or that hour, some of us has an hour break midday. But that 30 minutes for sure, for most of us, she would be considered off duty. She could step outside the building and take a personal call, and have that meeting, right? But if that meeting goes to 40 minutes, that's 10 minutes that she was working on government time for an outside activity. And that doesn't look like much, right? But if that regularly happens throughout the year, that could be, some odd total days of work that you've now done in conflict of your employment. So you have to watch it. Taking meetings during tour duty, blah, 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 using position to influence. That could be an issue, especially if she's not recused. Attend meetings. We talked about that one. Misuse of position. Blah blah blah. Yeah, using government phone. Government blah. Yeah, she's using her government phone. Like if she takes that meeting on her DC government computer, that would definitely be a violation as well. Even if she's off duty, right? She just takes her DC government computer home and decides to work for another company using her DC government computer. That would be a misuse of government property. We are only supposed to use these devices for DC government work. With that being said, the representation rule that I just discussed is also a bar here. A staffer at DDOT was reviewing plans and proposals for the XYZ company, but then saw that she signed off on it. She wasn't supposed to do that. So yeah, she could be an engineer for another company and review, some of the work in her off-duty capacity, right? But she can't represent in front of DC government, and even signing off on a document that's being submitted to DC government, like basically representing this stuff to be true or factual or accurate to the government, you signed off on that for the third party organization or business, that is a violation of the representation rule. So showing up and speaking on their behalf, signing off on their behalf, all violations of the representation rule. Somebody else that doesn't work for DC government has to do those things for those outside jobs or for those third parties. And for our next rule, we got a prohibition against engaging in outside work that impairs your mental or physical capacity. So a lot of times people reach out and they can get approval for outside jobs. We'll say that this doesn't conflict, but we also ask, how many hours do you work this job? And 20 hours or less, we know that people can squeeze that in. Whole 40-hour jobs, full-time secondary employment, and you work full-time for DC government, that's going to be tricky. Now, we know that it can happen. Some people, with DC government jobs, if they're, what do I want to call them? What do you call them when they're first contact, emergency situations? First responder. That was the word I was looking for. You're a first responder. Sometimes they work a shift where, they're working 20 hours straight, or 2 or 3 days straight. And then they have 4 days off. Sometimes they can have another full-time job. That's fine. But if you're, working 40 hours, 8 hours during the day, and then you clock off and you got a 3-hour break before you start your other 8-hour job, and you clock off from that, and then you got to immediately go to sleep for 4 hours and then work your DC government job, you're going to be tired, right? You're going to look like this at your desk, and being tired like that because you work a second job is going to be a violation of the outside, employment rule. Somebody said, what if you publish something like a book? A book is fine, right? Just do it all on your outside activity. Now, that book has to be about something, in your outside of your DC government work. Like you can't write a book about your DC government job while you're working for DC government. Like I work for DDOT, right? And for the street division specifically, and then I go ahead and I write a book called How to Get Approvals for doing street work in DC. You can't do that. You can't write a book, specifically, about your DC government work, because then that would be, public office for private gain, right? It has to be about something general. Now, it could be an engineering book, but it has to be like best practices across the nation. It can't be specifically related to your DC government work. But you could write a manual about how to do effective street repairs. Yes, you can. As long as it's general best practice and not specific to DC, then it's fine. All right, examples of prohibited activities: working shifts that leave you too tired, taking on excessive hours. And then we got another joke that I thought that I deleted. Why did the employee bring a pillow to work? Because they were working so much they needed a nap between meetings. Simple enough, right? All right. So this is the rule that we've been discussing, right? The prohibition against serving as a representative in any matter before the district. And so a lot of times when we think about representation, we're thinking about attorneys, right? Because we see this here, we have the attorney, he's covering the mic so he doesn't hear, so everyone else doesn't hear the question that he's asking to his client. So he's giving some legal advice here. And then once the client infers, he'll take his hand off the mic and either one of them, will speak, regarding the question, that was just asked. One of these individuals is an attorney, representing, the other. So that's clear, right? But just because you're not an attorney doesn't mean that you're not representing. Like I said earlier, if you sign off on a document for an outside agency, you're representing that agency. You're representing that document to be true or accurate or things of that nature. You're representing that you can be contacted regarding the facts of this application. All right. And then they're going to reach out and they're going to talk to you, and then you're going to have a discussion. Those discussions are representation, right? While you're working for DC government, you cannot represent an outside entity or third party or your business before DC government. Even if you're off duty, right? You're off duty in your personal capacity and you work for the company, but you show up to a meeting with the district government and you don't say a word, right? But you're there because of that company. That's going to be considered representation because you showed up in representation of that company while you're working for DC. So basically, you have to be a ghost in the background. So you work for these other companies, and they may do business with DC government that otherwise doesn't conflict with your employment. You just have to be a ghost. You can be listed on their website. You can have a bio up that shows that you work there or you affiliated, with the 501c3. You're this person or director or instructor or whatever it is that you do there. That's fine, but you just can't sign off on anything. You can't work there during your DC government tour duty, and you can't represent them in front of DC government. All right. So employees cannot serve as representative agents or attorneys for outside entities and matters before the District of Columbia. And an example of those activities, acting as an attorney. And so, like, sometimes, you might be an attorney, but you don't work for, of course, Office of Attorney General, right? You're just an attorney, and you might be, helping a friend out or whatever who's gotten into some criminal trouble, and so you're at Superior Court. You took off that day to help them out, but you're sitting across from OAG attorneys, and you're also an attorney for DC government. That's still going to be a violation of the representation rule because you can't be there in front of DC government. So even though you're at Superior Court, you're also trying to convince the Office of Attorney General to do something regarding your client. And so with that being said, that's going to be a violation of representation rule as well. Now, for those attorneys, if you do take off and you're in your off-duty capacity, you can represent two private entities or a private person against another private person in court, so long as district government isn't involved. And Superior Court is not considered district government. On the flip side, administrative court is. So you can't represent in the administrative agencies as a DC government employee. All right, and so I've said all of these: speaking on behalf, signing off, things of that nature, right? The exceptions: Special government employees are exempt. So if you're an agency or a board member or something of that nature, if it's outside, like a board member, if it's outside of your agency, a lot of those board members aren't considered employees. And so with that being said, they can represent so long as it's not a matter before they're on board. Some of them are considered employees. Close family members or guardians can represent as long as they are unpaid. So you can help out your child or a close family member in certain situations. The next prohibition is going to be a prohibition against outside activity that is illegal. Does anybody recognize the individual there? I'm from Chicago, so I'll put that person. This is Capone, right? So I know bootlegging was one of his ventures. So of course here, if you're not permitted to sell, alcohol beverages, and your job is, selling some type of illegal, I would not say illegal, restricted, substance. And so you're doing so, illegally. You can't have, an outside activity, doing, illegal work. So in any such case, not only would you possibly face criminal sanctions for being a cocaine dealer or something like that, you would also be fined by the Board of Government Ethics for having that outside activity as a drug dealer. Uh, with that being said, owning or operating a marijuana business is still in the federal code as illegal. And so even though they've said that they're no longer prosecuting it, as of now, it's still on the books as being unlawful. And so right now, DC government employees are restricted from owning, dispensaries and things of that nature until the federal code is changed. All right. Somebody said they're from Evanston, from Stokey. I know some people from Evanston. Well, I don't know them anymore, but when I went on a tour of my undergrad, there were some kids from Evanston there. All right. So here's some cases that we can see how serious sometimes some of these events can get. Like when we run afoul of the outside activity rules, like I said, sometimes we'll violate one rule or just have one action, but that action implicates several different rules, right? And so the fines can get up there. So this is a case, and I would like people to focus on the lesson. If you ask me, who these people are or whatever, or these cases can be found on our website. But just focus on the lesson and not who the individuals are. These are cases that ended up in fines. And so, with that being said, if you're not familiar, we've got three ways that we resolve a violation. So that there's an actual violation, right? So if there's no violation, it gets dismissed. Before, when there's an actual violation, let's say if it's lower level, we'll give you a letter explaining how you violated the code of conduct, tell you not to do it again, and take some training, right? And then that's completely confidential. But if it arises to a fine, you have an opportunity to negotiate. We'll give you a negotiated disposition. It outlays the facts on how the rule was violated, and then it gives you an associated fine that you can negotiate to some capacity. But we pretty much are fair with what we've fined before, right? And then we take in some circumstances regarding the individual cases and the individuals themselves. And then also there is a public hearing. Sometimes a case, we believe they're a violation, but you just don't want to pay the fine, or you don't believe there's a violation. Well, we can have a hearing. And there's two types of hearings. One is non-public, but if there's violation, that's going to be public, the violation itself. And then the public hearing is before the board, and they'll make a decision on whether or not you violated the code of conduct. Even if they don't find all the violations that we found, most likely there are going to be some violations there. And it'll be public nonetheless. So in any such case, here the respondent was a psychologist for the District of Columbia, and he was responsible for assessing students needing special education services. However, they also ran an outside business subcontracting similar services to a neighboring jurisdiction. Their timesheets show overlapping hours that were from 8:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. for the outside job, but their district government duty was from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. So remember what I was saying before? Even if you have some leeway as an independent contractor to kind of work that job in your outside capacity, taking that shift in and of itself or agreeing to that shift for the outside activity is going to, or the outside organization is going to be an issue. But in this case, there was evidence that he actually, worked during that shift as well, and didn't take annual leave for district government while doing that. So that was a violation of DPM 1800.3J, obtaining outside employment during DC government duty hours. So it contained a shift that was in conflict. Conducting assessments for DC students during official hours, right? That was basically just conflicting hours in the employment. Improper use of government time. So both of those are implicated with that. Working the neighborhood jurisdiction while being paid by DC government. And then, of course, that total fine was $5,000. Next up, we have respondent served as a chairperson of a DC government board. Not uncommon, respondent had a romantic relationship with a woman that he naturally met within his industry of work. The woman was a designer and architect that was the owner of a firm that designed buildings. Respondent's girlfriend was awarded the district contract that was approved by the respondent's board. However, he did not disclose his relationship with the firm awarded. And even though he did not cast a vote for approval, he failed to officially recuse himself from voting, and he signed the approval. And then, although the involved parties were not legally married, they owned a home they lived in and partnered on other business interests. So that's what was being said. So we got that financial disclosure statement. I don't know if a board member would have been responsible for filling that out, but this is why we do it for DC government workers, as well. Just so we know that what you do or what your, because I think it says spouse or domestic partner, right? Or what your domestic partners does to make sure that you're properly screened off when they're in an application before your agency. So with that being said, he failed to recuse from votes that affected a closely affiliated person's financial interests. This would have been his general partner and both domestic partner because they lived together, and then they also had joint ventures of business with each other. Signed an approval of a qualified bidder without disclosing the relationship. And so those are two parts of that. This is the conflict of interest code. And then also did not disclose financial interest related before voting on contracts. And this resulted in a $15,000 fine. And so, true enough, with this situation, from what we were able to discover, or the Office of OGE was able to discover, this person or the girlfriend was likely to have been awarded the contract without any inside help or knowledge or anything of that nature. It seemed like they were qualified to do this work on behalf of the district. And so, if all this person did was recuse, written recusal, and not sign off on anything, would have been perfectly fine. However, because they did not do that, it resulted in a $15,000 fine and a lot of embarrassment. Next outside activity, and we're going to try to wrap it up. We're coming up on an hour. Hopefully, I didn't bore you too much. We got teaching, writing, and speaking. You're allowed to be a teacher. We had a teacher on the call earlier. I used to be an adjunct professor. I enjoyed it. But it allows district government employees to receive compensation for engaging in teaching activities, writing publications, writing books, consulting activities, or speaking engagements that are not prohibited by law, regulations, or agency standards. Now, such activities must be conducted outside of your tour of duty while the employee is on annual leave. You can't be on FMLA or sick leave or anything like that. Take annual leave and go to the teaching event or the speaking event or whatever. And you can do it. And then the teaching, writing, or speaking, like I said before, cannot draw on non-public official data or ideas. Like you can't write a book on how to be a street engineer for DDOT or something like that. It can't be specific to your DC government job. It has to be off your general experiences. That's why you're working for for DC government. All right, and then the last one, seeking or negotiating for outside work that conflicts of interest. And I don't know if y'all familiar with the individual picture here, but there's some things that comes up, with uh getting benefits from the work that you do, whether or not they occur beforehand or after the fact. It's gonna run it odd. So with that being said, seeking is also a way that you can violate the outside activities, just seeking employment, right? You shouldn't seek employment that conflicts with your DC government work. And so a way to avoid that conflict is to recuse. So let's say if you have an opportunity with an outside agency, some private agency, but they do work with your district agency, and sometimes you make decisions regarding that outside company. If you put in an application or you begin negotiating work for that company, go ahead and recuse on your government side when they come across your table for a decision. Not recusing will cause you to cause a conflict of interest. Then we also got DPM should not engage in outside employment activities, including seeking or negotiating employment that is a conflict with the official duties. And that's also negotiating for employment that would occur after you left district government, especially if you negotiated while making decisions for them, because even the negotiation is a violation of this rule. And then, of course, recusal saves you from all of that. So we had a presentation maybe a couple of days ago where I think it was just basically how to recuse. And we just driving home like recuse, recuse, recuse. That is very important. That saves you, from having the conflict of interest issues. So write it, briefly describe the potential conflict of interest, send it to your supervisor, and then copy it to BEGA, and we'll also keep it as well. All right, and that we're coming up on the end. I only went 3 minutes over. That was great because I could get long-winded. And like I said, if you got any more questions, you can reach out to us, Maurice. What was it? Maurice.echols@dc.gov or bega@dc.gov. You see our email there. And we got the gentleman. He's, yes, with the money in the air. Like I said, you can have an outside job. You can work, a secondary job. Some of us need to. Right? But just do so within the guidelines, and you can be safe. And then reach out for advice. And then again, meet us at happy hour 5 to 6. In case you're still on, about to drop that in the chat. What was it? Lincoln Restaurant. All right, and have a good rest of the day.